Welcome back to our sixth lecture in the class Biblical Counseling with the Institute of East Asia Training. If you're paying close attention, you will have noticed that my pink buddy dog has moved since the last lecture, and that is to help me to be able to recognize which files go with which, because my phone breaks these lectures up into pieces and it can be complicated to get them together. Hey, there's not going to be a quiz this time, because how can I give a quiz off your 15 minutes of discussing things on each of those two questions? So you're going to be giving me those 2-minute presentations. Someone from your class is doing that, and if you're not in Malaysia, and that'll have to be in lieu of a quiz. So today we're talking about the pioneers and mental health. And my experience with this is I had no idea a year ago, even when I began digging into this topic of mental health in the writings of Ellen White, how many of our pioneers really struggled. And when I talk about the pioneers, I'm going to talk about two kinds of pioneers. There are the kind that were pioneers in the sense that they lived very early on in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, the 1840s, 50s, 60s, 70s, but maybe you've never heard of them because they didn't play prominent roles. But they were pioneers despite that because of when they lived and their contribution. And then we'll talk about the more classic pioneers like James White and Haskell and Elder Cornell, persons that made very significant contributions over decades, but also had periods when they were more or less incapacitated by mental health issues. And I think as we look at these cases, that you'll find insights and encouragement that we'll be able to use later on in the class as we discuss various ailments and how to deal with them. So let's start with Elder Rhodes. And if you have my book handy, I'm reading to you from from page 16 and 17. In 1870, Elder Rhodes was a man who had been preaching for the Adventist, but he wasn't well appreciated in every place. He had a group that kind of liked him and he liked them. And we're going to read something about him from Letter 4, 1870. You have scarcely touched the work you have to do, which is to subdue and control self. You have been a very selfish man. You have a special interest for yourself. Your attention is so much devoted to self that God will not accept your service. Elder Rhodes, what was his problem? Well, Ellen White seems to describe his mental health issue, and I'll tell you why I think it's a mental health issue later, but she's describing it as selfishness at its very base, a very great selfishness. And we're going to see some of the ways that selfishness was manifested, ways that maybe you might have experienced or seen in the case of others. You should know his selfishness was causing troubles with his friends and with his marriage. I'll just read you here a bit from the book. Outside of his home, he was a sharp businessman, but God was dishonored by his grasping business deals. If you were inside his personal sphere of friends, you would know something else about Brother Rhodes. He wasn't well. He needed coddling. He needed accommodation. He wanted you to baby him, to serve him, to do his housework for him. He was just not up to taking care of himself. But in reality, taking care of himself is exactly what he was about. And good physical work was just what he needed, because it would take his mind off of himself. That was what I just read to you. Wasn't Ellen White. That was me as an author, but paraphrasing what I read in Ellen White about him. Now I'm quoting her, again from that letter 4. You are so constantly laboring to care for yourself and shield yourself from danger of being sick, that you bring upon yourself the very evils that you seek to avert. You can perform physical labor and industry will be the greatest blessing you can have. Your active mind will be diverted, and your thoughts will be turned into a more even, healthful channel. You should control your mind, bear your own burdens, not expect others to wait upon you and indulge you, that you must have special care and attention because you are sick. The best way to overcome disease is to turn the attention from self to engage in some useful physical labor. Forget yourself." Unquote. Do you see how the holistic principles are applying to Brother Rhodes? He felt ill, he acted ill, and it was making him ill. And what he needed, what would really restore his physical health, would be a change in his mentality. It would be for him to get out and do some of that physical work that he felt like he just couldn't do. If he would get out and work, he would be better. He would do better. But if he would stay there and imagine himself being ill, well, you know what would happen. Reading a little bit more about him. This is me writing, not Ellen White. The selfishness that pervaded Rhodes's life caused him to be incapacitated. He was seeking a welfare check before the invention of the welfare system. And that is, he was looking to get handouts. And the prophet accosted him and told him that many persons more sick than he were far more courageous to go about supporting themselves. As God said to Barak long ago, "Do you seek great things for yourself? Seek them not." Jeremiah 42:5. Now we're reading from Ellen White. It's from that same letter 4. You have a diseased imagination, and desire to be favored and petted and waited upon, when you do not need it and should not have it. Those who have done this kind of work for you have indulged you to your own injury. You expected to be the object of their special care. You were better able to wait upon them, and it would have been for your good to have done so, rather than they to wait on you. Do you hear it? Brother Rhodes, that preacher man who needed so much care and attention there in his house, that man that was almost an invalid, the problem was a diseased imagination. It was imagining how ill and how sick he was that made him as weak and incapacitated as he was. And serving others, getting out there and doing physical work for himself and for them, would have been something like a cure for him. Well, that's Brother Rhodes. We want to be sure we get to our other pioneers today. Let me just look at my notes. Let me look up Brother Cornell. I'm using the navigation pane, and you can do that, and it'll work the same way for you. In the navigation pane, you can type in Cornell, and it'll take you right to sections that have him. There are 3, and we're reading about him now, the hypochondriac. Do you know that word hypochondriac? Hypochondriac, it is a word we use for someone who imagines that they're sick in such a way that they can hardly function. This is quoting letter 54, 1876, to Elder Cornell. Your plea ever was that you were not well. You felt sick, while at the same time I saw that you were deluding yourself with this deception, for it was not a reality when you said last night that doctors could not tell what ailed you. I said to myself, true enough, nor if a physician could prescribe for you. But he who made man the great physician understands your case. Your imagination is diseased. You are sound as far as physical strength is concerned, but your mind is sick. You let it dwell upon yourself and upon things which you should not. Truly, you have a diseased mind. It is not natural for you to love devotion. You have but little faith. Your mind and heart are unsanctified. You are not a Bible student. You idle away much precious time that should be used in qualifying yourself to be an able workman. I saw that though your thoughts were not in obedience, I saw that your thoughts were not in obedience to Christ. Purify the fountain, and the streams will be pure. I saw that your complaining and talking of your troubles, and how hard and excessively you labored, is in very many cases a delusion of the mind. It had no foundation in truth. At times you have had to labor quite hard, but no harder than the other ministers who have not more than 2 or 3 of the capital of strength to draw upon that you have. When you are repining and complaining of sickness and overwork, and that you are exhausting your strength, just bear in mind that you are deceived. It is in doing those things that you ought not, and suffering your imagination to run as it will, that places you in a condition of almost inefficiency that will finally bring upon you permanent disease. You should give others an example of faith and confidence in God which you do not. In your life, in your words and deportment, you do not rightly represent the religion of Christ. Do you hear what's going on with Elder Cornell? His disease is in his mind, but he has a real possibility of ending up with permanent, that is, unfixable physical sickness. He could become permanently ill because of his imagination. Let me read you more here. Well, before we go on to James White, I want to say one more bit about Elder Cornell. Do you see here that it wasn't natural for him to love devotional exercises? He liked to preach, but he didn't like to study. He liked to share, but he didn't like to dig. And if he had been in that digging, that studying habit, what a difference it would have made for his mental health. He was not using his time well. His time was, what she said, is idled away. And that idling away was making opportunity for the devil to infect his mind. But if he had kept busy, I guess what you're seeing is that when God gave Adam 6 days to labor, God was giving Adam a prescription that would help maintain not only physical, but mental health. Let me turn here now to James White. If you're looking for that last one, well, it's too late. I'm looking now on page 55. Just a moment. So we'll be talking this semester about what to do with our past experiences, past thoughts. And what we're looking at here with James White is partly related to that. I'll just read you from the book and then the statement. Some of our exercises have involved thinking back on your traumatic experiences. This is part of soul searching and it has value. But a warning is in order. When you have repented of your part in past events and of your part in reactions to those events, that may be the time to let the past go. To bring up wounds again repeatedly, or to bring up wounds again repeatedly afterwards, can grieve the Spirit of God. I think I need to remove that word, it. That is what happened to James White. He had been wronged by Jan Andrews. God had forgiven the sin and Andrews had repented, but James still felt the pain, and so was rehearsing the events over again in his mind. Quoting now from Ellen White. Now, my dear husband, in view of the things which I have seen, I am prepared to say that I greatly tremble for the direction your mind has taken, to go back and call up the past, which God has in a most wonderful vision shown me he has forgiven. And that Brother Andrews grieved the Spirit of God by bringing up these things and rehearsing them when God has shown he has forgiven the past errors and wrongs of Brother and Sister Andrews. Did you hear that? We're not talking about Brother Andrews right now, but it's mentioned that he and his wife had repented of things. And then when James White brought them up, Jane Andrews mourned over them again. And that grieved God, that Jane Andrews and his wife would think again about these things that they'd already put away and that God had forgiven. and then God set his seal to the pardon given by his blessing resting upon them that Christmas night. The purpose in your mind I dare not encourage you to carry out. This is James White, remember. Your imagination is diseased. Satan has taken advantage of it, not only to injure and destroy Brother Andrews, but to ruin your own soul. In view of what God has shown me, I cannot go one step with you in this direction. We will step quietly away from the work. Do you hear what she's saying? James and Ellen might have been a necessity of backing away from the leadership in the Adventist Church because of James's mental health problems. We will step quietly away from the work, but when you desire to publish the failings and errors of the responsible men among Seventh-day Adventists, I am restrained every time I make the attempt. I dare not do it, even for your love and confidence. God has shown me that, that you were unforgiving to your brethren and children. Do you guard this point as God would have you? The cause of God is already enough. What do you desire Brother Andrews to do? He has already confessed heartily over and over again his errors, until you have entreated him to no more make reference to it. The Lord himself has spoken that he must not longer let the past affect him, for he made himself weak and lost his faith by dwelling upon the past. He must forget the things which are behind and press forward to those things which are before. That's letter 13, 1871, and it's about Brother Andrews and about Jan Andrews and James White. They both had a disease of the mind that was related to how they were thinking about the past, and it was such a way that caused crippling of their energies in the present. Their past was discouraging and causing them to despair, and well, we'll find more from James White. It did more than that. Let me go to the next. This is now from page 63, the case study of James White. And to save you some time reading, I'll just read you something here from the book. Perhaps as great a personality as James White may have struggled with aspects of mental illness, he certainly exhibited signs of an overactive imagination that confused him regarding the realities around him. Especially in 1861, he neared a low point. His mind bordered, quote-unquote, on insanity, quoting Ellen White, as he grieved regarding the apostasies of fellow workers. Ellen feared that he would become insane and observed that he had, quote, lost all confidence in his brethren, unquote. And she saw that Satan had a plan to drive James to insanity by leading him to think long and hard about how unfairly he had been treated by his quote-unquote brethren. This is letter 4A, 1861, and letter 31, 1861, and manuscript 5, 1861, all quoted in that paragraph. Do you see what Satan's doing? He has found James in a time of discouragement, and he plans to cause James to go insane, to put such pressure on him that he will be completely lost to the cause. I don't know if Satan's aiming to do that for you or to me, but I think probably he has similar plans in mind. What we might today call a domineering attitude made the spiritual incompetencies of his brethren nearly unbearable. And in his unhealthy state, he even decided to publish his wife's visions only rarely. And in 1869, even she felt that she was near her wit's end as she thought about the harsh way brethren were treating her ailing husband. That was all me writing, but paraphrasing from or sharing from letter 13, 1869. The harshness he received seemed 2 years later to lead him to try to force other persons to dredge up their own failures. He wanted to publish the mistakes of his brethren openly, after they had already repented and confessed repeatedly. His imagination was, quote, diseased, unquote, and Ellen suggested that they would be better off to quietly back away from ministry for the church than to go forward in his mental state. And we've already looked at that statement. Again, 6 years later, she confided to Willie that her husband was making mountains of difficulty out of small things, that he seemed like an insane man, unquote. And she prescribed for his diseased imagination some very specific therapy, remodeling their home. Such work would help by leading him to forget himself. Now that's one thing we've noticed both in Elder Cornell and Jan Andrews and now in James White. Thinking about ourselves is unhealthy for ourselves. And much of our diseased imaginations could be aided, could be remedied if our minds could be distracted from thinking about our own situation. This is from letter 46, 1877. I see that Father is going to be considerable care if he has any unfavorable symptoms. He wants to do so much and make such a mountain of it that he seems like an insane man. He must have physical exercise and not take it all in riding all the time. Lucinda, he will find employment in building and attending to this place. He may forget himself in thus doing. This would be worth all the money paid for the place. I feel cut off completely from my relatives. The less I see of them, the better for me. But Willie, I am thoroughly convinced that your father should not stay for any length of time at Battle Creek. Again, I am not convinced that we should endeavor to perplex Father. I am convinced that we should endeavor to perplex Father as little as possible. Father is happy, cheerful, and free. I believe that he should have had a change before this, but I failed to bring it about. Father, and she means James White when she says this, Father has, I believe, very nearly unbalanced in some directions. But we may save his brain from permanent disease and insanity by a judicious course. Now, I hope that's causing your ears to go up. She's talking about saving a mind from permanent mental illness by doing something wisely. We must be cheerful. We must be happy and patient, and not be easily grieved or discouraged or disappointed if Father cannot do exactly as we feel that he might. We must consider the business care, the continual wearing tax upon his brain for 25 years. Yes, my son, we must look at these things carefully, candidly, and prayerfully. You were not as careful as you should have been with Addie James. She might have been saved from insanity if greater care and more tender, thoughtful compassion had been exercised. You pressed that case too hard, and that with other things resulted as it has. You were not merciful and compassionate in the case of Jenny Geyer. You could have comforted her. You could have helped her mind. You were wronged by the course she and others pursued, and she repented. But you did not forgive and take off the burden you had laid upon her. This is letter 3, 1872. What we're seeing here is not just about James White, but about contemporaries of James White, ladies who maybe suffered nervous breakdowns or maybe had bipolar disorder. We can't really know what was going on there, but some sort of insanity in one case. And what would have made a difference for them is if those around them had been cheerful, encouraging, light, and free. Apparently some minds that are toned to negativity can't take negativity. Now we're reading from Manuscript 5, 1862. I was shown that Satan's power had been especially exercised in the office. He has sought to control matters there and to affect minds, and by so doing, this is probably the printing office, and by so doing to bring about a separation of feelings from Brother White, which would dishearten and unfit him to act the part where God designed he should act. Satan's object was partially carried out. It was a bitter, cruel work, and its effect had been to destroy the courage of Brother White and his power to hope. Listen, his mind, courage, and faith have become so enfeebled that he could not control his mind. Would he be spiritual or devotional, the mind would immediately drop to the injustices done to him, which had weakened his energies and faith. Everything he undertook to accomplish was marked with discouragement. His soul was stung with the unjust course of those who knew what he had suffered in his cause, the privations endured, and sacrifices made to see it prosper. Jesus alone has known the real sufferings of his mind, and has laid his hand beneath him to lift him above the oppressive weight which was destroying his health, his happiness, and his usefulness. Do you hear what was going on? Satan saw James White in the office. He had a mind to do something to destroy him, and to use discouragement and negativity and harshness, unfeeling, like a lack of recognition of how hard James had worked. You know, when people are overworked, they're impatient sometimes. And I have recently been with a ministry that I highly value. And I found in that ministry that someone who's been very overworked there is waning in patience, having less of it. And this is a natural course. It's one that happened to James after 25 years of hard work. And what Satan was trying to do is to take advantage of his worn out condition to ruin, to move from worn to ruined. And if we watch this ourselves, maybe we can help people and help them avoid that same problem of moving from a condition of being worn to one of ruined. This is from manuscript 32, 1896. 32a. Today the world is mad, and insanity is upon them, which is hurrying them on to eternal ruin. Every species of indulgence prevails, and men become so infatuated with vice that they will not listen to warnings or appeals. You can see here that I neglected to put in a reference. So this is from letter 4, 1870 again. And this is talking to someone who had a manic attack. Manic attacks, maybe if you know someone who has bipolar or monopolar disorder, a polar issue, you might know how they can have temporary insanity that causes them so much trouble. I slept little last night, but awoke at 3 o'clock and wrote 8 pages for Sister Israel. I sent her 2 pages per week. She has been in despair for all of 8 months. But the Lord was with us when we visited in Sydney, March 18. We found she had just had a very severe attack of frenzy. Frenzy, that's an old word for what we would call mania today. She had climbed out of the window and gone to the neighbors in her nightdress, screeching at the top of her voice. Brother Israel was afraid he would be compelled to place her in an asylum for the insane. We had a hard time, as she was determined to talk with me and to ask me questions. But when we visited her the next Friday, we could labor with her better. Thank God, the power of the enemy is broken. She seems to be sitting at the feet of Jesus and learning of him. She says she knows that angels of God came with Sister White to her home. I write to her a letter every week. This keeps up a connection between us, and I can talk with her with the pen upon faith. Isn't it interesting? Ellen White wasn't turned away by someone who'd had a case of frenzy, a case of mania, but she developed a long-term relationship with her, communicating with her even at a distance every week, trying to keep her in a proper frame of mind, helping her think about faith and faithful thoughts. This is another statement related to the same. We could but think of Jesus of Nazareth, the chief priests and scribes and elders seeking to find some occasion to accuse him and put him to death. The same hate and satanic envy, jealousy and rage was manifested by First-day Adventist ministers. Such a hellish spirit could not be so effectively exhibited by any other class of professed Christians. And after we left, the last 2 days of the meetings were characterized, that is, there had been a joint meeting of the two groups of Adventists, but now the Sabbath had withdrawn. After we left, the last 2 days of the meetings were characterized by confusion and noise that should make those blush who have accused us of fanaticism. They had a praying circle and had a regular shouting and hallooing time. One woman was made insane, and others were not far from it. She kept up screeching and screaming all night and during the day. I did not mean to write all this, but I have. What I'm finding as I'm going through this archive is that Ellen White had many experiences with persons that were suffering to some degree with mental health issues. Kellogg also suffered some from paranoia. Have we talked about Haskell yet? Let me just look and see here. I think we haven't talked about, I think we skipped Haskell. Let me go to Haskell. Haskell was one of the warmest defenders of Ellen White's ministry, and he was also a beneficiary. He needed her cautions and encouragements. He trusted her ministry. But did he trust the brethren? Not so much in 1891. She wrote to him that he should, quote, not be suspicious and mistrust, unquote, his brethren, because his, quote, suspicions were often without true foundation, unquote. His mind was so hardened against his brethren that anything, quote, they can do will be interpreted by you in an incorrect light, unquote. This is from page 26. What she was saying to him is that he was suffering in his imagination from a case of paranoia. This is letter 14, 1891. You imagine that something is concealed from you, that there is some underhanded work that by and by will be revealed. You have had some trials, but they are not half as great as you imagine. Evil is not determined against you as you suppose. Have you ever had an experience like that, where your mind was imagining that people were against you, that they were conspiring? That kind of paranoia is a common characteristic of schizoid issues, but of course it's not unique to them. Anyone can be paranoid. And here we find Brother Haskell suffering from paranoia. Let me see what we have here. Notice in that counsel that she told him not to be paranoid. She counseled him not to allow himself to be suspicious without proper knowledge, not to cherish those thoughts that might come to him in his weakness, where he suspected that there was an underhanded movement against him. And maybe overwork was part of that. I want to read you a bit related to Dr. Kellogg. But overwork might have been another. Notice how Dr. Kellogg, I'm writing this isn't Ellen White. Notice how Dr. Kellogg was in danger of similar malfunction of his imagination. His taking on extra responsibilities endangered him mentally. And could this warning regarding writing have saved him from authoring the Living Temple if he had heeded it? Listen carefully to what was written in 1901. I was shown that if you continue to tax the brain with writing, with all the increasing responsibilities you will become nervous. You have so active an imagination that when the mind is worn, the brain nerve power forbids to do its work healthfully. You will be constantly inclined to be suspicious of your brethren without a cause, and you will suspect your very best friends that they are no longer your friends but your enemies. This is letter 170, 1901. What was the danger to Dr. Kellogg? He might begin to suspect his very best friends of seeking something against him. And he was warned about the overwork and the overwriting just at a time when he was in danger of writing some of the worst material he ever wrote in his life. So what we've been looking at today is the nature of inspiration as it relates to our pioneers. There are many more statements about James White that I haven't expanded yet and written on them. And I think maybe I'll just kind of go over some of them with you, even though I haven't included them yet in the writing, so that you'll have an idea of what's coming. Because, oh, there were so many there. Let me find it. Bordeaux. Yeah. Let's see if I have anything here about Bordeaux besides that. Bourdaau. Bourdeau apostrophe S. Well, maybe I need to take you to letter 4. I'm going to try a new feature I saw on this recently. Let's see if I think there's a pause. Well, listen, I found that my Ellen White CD-ROM is on the very same phone that I'm making this recording with. So I'm going to give you a reading assignment. It's to read letter 4 and letter 5 from 1881. Letter 4 and letter 5. You can find those on the Ellen White webpage or on the E.G. White 2 CD-ROM under the letters and manuscripts, under the annotated or under the bound volumes. If you have a hard time finding it, let me know and I'll find a way to help you find it. But read that letter 4. Let's review some things we've seen here, and then I'll leave some more time for the discussion that we need to have had starting, I guess it would be starting today. What we've seen is that James White struggled with his mental health. He struggled with depression and sometimes mania, sometimes so badly that it threatened to pull him completely out of the work. His mental health problems led him to be harsh, led him to be accusatory, led him to be overbearing and domineering. And Haskell's mental health issues, they led him to distrust his brethren. And Jan Andrews also felt like he was under attack, and so did Haskell. What I see here is that the diseases that are familiar to us, the severe disease of like schizophrenia that involves so much paranoia, has some baby parallels in our normal experience. Satan is always working to cloud our experience of mental well-being, and he does that through the harsh treatment we receive and the harsh treatment that we give, through the unsympathetic treatment we receive and the unsympathetic treatment that we give, through the negativity that we hear and the negativity that we express. Satan is seeking to cloud and destroy those minds until they're incapable of really delivering good, solid material. So there certainly will be a quiz tomorrow, and that reading I'll be asking you if you read those manuscripts, manuscript 4 and 5, 1881. Let me have a prayer with you now and we'll close the session. Our Father in heaven, I'm asking that you'll bless us as we talk about our pioneers, how they suffered, that you'd save us from the kind of difficulties that they had. Show us how to go forward, we ask, in the name of Jesus. Amen.